Our guest is the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Embassy of Israel. He holds his Doctor of Jurisprudence degree from Tel Aviv University. He entered the Foreign Service, or the Diplomatic Service of Israel, in 1976. He's gone through a series of assignments from the beginning in Kingston through Boston, Pretoria later. About the time that he received the Outstanding Merit Award, the Outstanding Member of the Foreign Service Award in 1987, which to me sounds most impressive given the respect that we all have for the Israeli diplomatic service. And he's had numerous assignments in the foreign ministry. He has first been assigned to the North American section. He's been in the Department of International Organizations. He's been in charge of training in the ministry, and he has served in a senior position in the office of the Deputy Foreign Minister. But most recently, he has, since over the past several years, been deeply involved in the Middle Eastern peace process. He's been a member of the Bilateral Steering Committee since 1992, and he's been deeply involved in critical negotiations before then and since. And at present time, as I say, he's Deputy Chief of Mission. So we're delighted to have someone with Mr. Gore's experience and involvement talk to us about what I think is a wonderfully titled and important period in our history. Minister Gore.
Good evening, and thank you very much for your warm reception and warm words. Actually, on the way here, I was thinking, why am I so excited or doesn't feel so comfortable to drive at this time of the day to Baltimore? Was it due to the subject, to the audience, you know, the excitement of the moment, following events of the last week? But after all, I decided that those were not the reasons. Actually, it's the first time that I'm coming to Baltimore, and I don't have to go to the aquarium and take a boat ride in this harbor. because since I arrived to Washington last year, about a year ago actually, every free weekend that I'm at home, I have my 3 kids standing in front of me and telling me, we have to drive to Baltimore. So it's the first time that I'm here without them. So thank you very much for this opportunity. On a more serious note, I really think that the timing of this meeting could not have been more appropriate. And I think that also the title of our conversation today was reinforced very significantly this past week. Because just a week ago, in the East Room of the White House, we had another signing ceremony. And I say another signing ceremony because we had a couple of them before. And hopefully we will have a couple of them in the very near future. But looking at what was going on in that room, I think was the best illustration to our topic today. And you are perfectly right when you said that you had the Syrian ambassador, you had the Egyptian ambassador, you had that ambassador, the other personality from the Middle East, and cooperation was not exactly the mood and not exactly the tone. But look what was happening, or what happened last week in the East Room of the White House. There was a podium, a platform there, and we had the host, President Clinton, who used to be in that room, and then we had Prime Minister Rabin sharing the same platform with President Mubarak of Egypt. On the same platform, King Hussein of Jordan, and the chairman of the PLO, Yasser Arafat. All of them standing together as if that was a daily event. And frankly, if you look at the coverage at the CNN, yet you had the best proof that that's an event which is not abnormal to the region. Because the ceremony began after some delays in the back rooms that we are still negotiating the last minute things, in a delay of about half an hour. But the broadcasting did not start at that time on the CNN. And we could have seen Johnny Cochran and Judge Ito and other people. And actually about half an hour after the ceremony began, and I was in Rome and I came out to see what was going on outside, I saw a note saying, we will begin in a minute the broadcasting or the live transmission from the East Room of the White House. We do apologize. He said, I'm sorry, the announcer said, I'm sorry that I want to tell you that you do not miss anything on the O.J. Simpson trial because there's an intermission, and once the summation will resume, we will come back to you from the East Room of the White House. So if one needed a better illustration to the change that we are going through, you had it. You had those 5 leaders of the Middle East, 4 of the Middle East and 1 from the United States, on the podium there, signing a very important agreement between Israel and the PLO, and the summation of O.J. Simpson continuing, and it goes on. But this podium is a very good illustration to the change that we are going through in the Middle East. And if that is not enough, there were 150 people in the East Room on that day. And whom did we have there? We had the Prime Minister of Morocco. We had Prince Saud, the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia. We had the Foreign Ministers of Oman, Qatar, UAE, Tunisia. And if I forgot somebody, it's because I got used to it also. I remember days that we looked with microscope to see whether there was a third secretary from half an Arab country in an event that an Israeli participated. And you had them all. You had all the Middle East in that room. And if that's not the spirit of cooperation, then it would be very difficult to find something else. But such an appearance or such an audience was even unthinkable just 2 years ago. Before the signing of September 13th, the signing of the DOP, the Declaration of Principles, between Israel and the Palestinians, all that was still a dream, was unachievable and unthought of. The agreement that we've signed last week is a model for peaceful coexistence between us and the Palestinians. It is a very comprehensive agreement. It holds more than 450 pages. It covers all spheres of life between us and the Palestinians. What the concept behind it is security separation and economic cooperation. And that's the philosophy of the negotiations and the agreements that we are trying to achieve with our neighbors. Because we have to ensure the security and at the same time to open up for cooperation, because only through cooperation we will be able to progress our region. The importance of this agreement, which is a follow-up, as I indicated to you, to the DOP that was signed in September. Then there were the Cairo Agreement of May 1994. Then there was the Agreement on Transfer of Authority of July 94. The importance of those agreements are because they were the kind of an eye-opener, an opportunity opener between us and the Arab world. Because the Palestinian issue was the core, at least so conceived by the Arab world, and if it was conceived by the Arab world as such, we have to accept it as such. It was the heart core of the Arab-Israeli conflict. And it was, and the Palestinian case and the Palestinian issue was the kind of the cement that held together the Arab world confronting the State of Israel. The DOP, the Declaration of Principle that was signed, was in a way the removal of that glue, of that cement that held together the Arab world against us. And it was that agreement that enabled us immediately after that to begin to negotiate with the Moroccans, the Tunisians, the Omanis, the Qataris. Following that, we established diplomatic relations with the Moroccans. We began a dialogue with the other countries in North Africa, in the Arab Gulf or in the Persian Gulf. It enabled us to achieve a full peace treaty with the Jordanians. It was impossible to reach a peace treaty with the Jordanians without having the agreement with the Palestinians. You know, I read many polls that everyone supports the peace treaty with the Jordanians. However, it has reservations about the agreement with the Palestinians. Without due respect, and I can state it very clearly and loudly, there was no agreement with the Jordanians if there was not an agreement with the Palestinians prior to that. And if one wants to have the best or proof to this theory that I have, look at what was happening in the negotiations with the Jordanians. Though I was on the Palestinian side, so one could say that I'm boosting it up because I was part of it. But look what was happening on the Jordanian track. We've managed to reach to an agreement with them, or to an understanding with them, on a common agenda for the negotiations in February 1993. In February 1993, we reached a common agenda. However, that agenda was not signed because the Jordanians did not want to sign it. With all kind of reasoning, they delayed it. When was the agenda signed? On the 14th of September 1993. 14th of September. What happened on the 13th of September? Everyone knows. The DOP was signed. The following day, the agenda was signed. So what, there was such deliberation on that night? No, it was ready, but we could not move forward without the breakthrough with the Palestinians. Once there was the breakthrough, we managed to progress rapidly with many countries and to reach a full peace with Jordan, which was signed, as you all remember, in the Arava, meaning on the border between Israel and Jordan, on the 29th of October 1994. Now, this agreement is a very important and very significant one because I believe that it can serve as a model to future agreements that we yet to be signed. Because as you remember, we are still negotiating with the Syrians and with the Lebanese. And hopefully, as I said at the beginning, we will have a few more signing ceremonies. But this, I'm emphasizing this agreement with the Jordanians because it can serve as a model, because it has certain unique solutions to territorial disputes that we had with the Jordanians. And if you remember, there are two parts, in the southern part in the Arava Valley and in the northern part near Aram Naharaim, where there was territorial claims of the Jordanians. However, those areas were cultivated by Israeli farmers for many years. Sovereignty went to the Jordanians, leases went to the Israelis, and very interesting solutions were found, and they're operative, and they can work. And they illustrate that even complicated problems can be solved if there's a will on both sides and there's enough creativity among the negotiators. Now, we are, with the Jordanians, if I'm already there, we are in the process of turning the peace between the governments to peace between peoples. Following the agreement with the Jordanians, the peace agreement with the Jordanians, there were 22 separate working groups negotiating 22 spheres of life between us and the Jordanians. That includes infrastructure and commerce and tourism and transportation and you name it. By the end, we've signed already. We've completed the negotiations and signed already 16 out of them. And by the end of the year, all of the 22 will be completed. Most of them, and I can almost dare to say all of them, will be completed by the end of this month before the Amman summit. And as you know, Amman is going to host the economic summit at the end of this month. Now, this process of turning the peace from governments to people is also part of the attempt to bring together or to break down those barriers that have been splitting us for so many years. So you will find Israelis by the thousands, and there's a quota now, a daily quota of 1,000 Israelis to go to Jordan, not because of any political reasons, but for very practical reasons, because the accommodation facility and the ability of the tourism infrastructure in Jordan cannot accommodate more. So you will find every day at least 1,000 Israelis going to Jordan. At the same time, the most favorable shopping mall of Jordan became the shopping mall of Malcha in Jerusalem. And you will find hundreds of Jordanians, thousands of Jordanians, coming to the mall in Jerusalem to do their shopping. It's much cheaper and closer than to fly to London. And you find equitable goods at much cheaper prices. The shekel is still way lower than the British pound. So this type of cooperation on the human level is also an illustration to the cooperation that is being developed between public sector, private sector, and individuals. And the best would be the concept of border. We all know in the Middle East, when you say border, what it means. Barbed wire, minefields, and bunkers, and the armed soldiers. The border between us and Jordan is going to be transformed, not to a green line, but to a green border. It's going to be a border of cooperation. And there's a concept, call it a project, of JRV, Jordan Rift Valley project, which is managed by a steering committee which consists of Israelis and Jordanians, which has taken or hired the services of an American corporation. And they began to plan and to have an overall feasibility study, and that already started, of planning of various projects and components of cooperation along the Jordan Rift Valley, which is the border between Israel and Jordan. And that includes different spheres of life, whether it is tourism, environment, energy, infrastructure in the sense of water and roads. And actually it was only about 3 weeks ago that we had here this steering committee sitting together as a kind of a tender committee, a joint tender committee, evaluating together the proposals of about 15 international corporations who proposed to be those consultants to prepare the feasibility study, arguing on the merits of each company and trying to come to an agreement on choosing the company. And what was interesting, that first we did it, the Israelis among themselves, the Jordanian among themselves, and then we sat together in order to finalize. The differences between the evaluations of the Israeli and the Jordanian teams of those companies was very small. Number 1 and number 2 were equal, and on number 3 they had to discuss and they found a third company. So maybe politically and philosophically in the past, one could not think about this cooperation. But when you remove those covers or those layers of hatred and prejudice, I think when you get into the real world of trying to improve life in the region, there's so much in common between us and them that nowadays when we are thinking in terms of cooperation, to many of us it's almost normal. We can't understand that for how many years we did not think about that. But actually we thought about that. But circumstances were such that it was impossible. And we can go into that and analyze what were the developments, the global political developments and the regional development that enable us to reach this kind of a process and this kind of a stage. Because you're right, it was unconceivable before the fall of the Soviet Union. It was unthinkable even before the Gulf War. Those events changed the structure and the way of thinking in the region, created new coalitions, and created new approaches to very old problems. Now, I've been talking so much about promotion of the peace process as if the peace process by itself was a goal. And let me tell you that definitely the process is not a goal, because the process is just a process. It's true, our goal is to reach peace. But peace by itself is yet, in addition to a transformation of the region to a new era, is also a mean. Peace itself is also a mean to fight new dangers that exist in our region. Because peace, and of course the peace process, is a mean to fight terror. Very simple. Especially when we are talking about the peace process with the Palestinians. Because why was terror so popular and so promoted in our region? We have the extremists and we have everyone. But why was it successful? It was successful because of many reasons. One of which, and maybe the most important one, is poverty. Because poverty leads to disappointment. Disappointment leads to despair. Despair is the best infrastructure for promotion of terror. And in order to fight terror, we have to use a two-track approach. And that's what actually we decided to do. One is the physical or military / intelligence fight against the hard core of the terrorist. Because there's no other way but to fight physically those who commit terror. At the same time, you have to fight the circumstances that create this fertile environment for terrorism. And therefore, you have to fight poverty and to work on the improvement of the living condition of the population. And this two-track approach is actually the glue of the new coalition in the region, the coalition of the moderates vis-à-vis the extremists. And the extremists are those fundamentalistic Islamic movements supported by Iran who are trying to derail this process. Because they know that if this process will succeed, it's the end of their ability to mobilize the masses. And you see their attempts, not only in the territories, but also in Egypt, in Jordan, in Algiers, in Sudan, and in many of the Emirates in the Gulf. In order to fight it, you need this coalition of the moderates. And this is an essential key in order to fight terror. Now, I can't talk about the peace process without mentioning, of course, Syria. Because if I emphasize that the Palestinian track is the glue or the cement that held together the Arab world against us, then only a solution in the negotiations with Syria, only peace with Syria, will bring to an end the Arab-Israeli conflict. Only peace with Syria will enable the Arab world to come together to reconcile completely with the state of Israel, to put an end to the conflict, to put an end to the Arab boycott, and really to reach this kind of what was considered in the past the utopic stage, which is not so utopic, the stage of a regional approach to issues that we all face. This, well, one word we have to say, we can't complete talking about the peace process without mentioning Lebanon at least. And Lebanon, unfortunately, is an offshoot of the Syrians. There won't be any developments with the Lebanese before there is a development with Syria. In order to have a development with Syria, and actually you all know that we are, in a way, stuck for the last 2 months. There's no progress on the Syrian track, unfortunately. Most probably we will see, actually today there is a meeting of Secretary of State with Foreign Minister of Syria, Shah, here in Washington, where there is an attempt to revitalize, following the event of last week, to revitalize this track. And most probably we will see a little of shuttling diplomacy of the Secretary towards the end of the month or beginning of next month in the region, in order to put together or to put this track back on track. The problem is that, and it's very unfortunate, that the Syrians agreed on a certain sequence of events with the Americans and with us. And the sequence of events was having the secretary in the region, then a meeting of the chiefs of staff, of the Israeli and the Syrian chiefs of staff, then a trip to the region of the peace team, the American peace team, in order to work out the schedule or the timetable and the agenda for a meeting of senior military officers who will discuss the security arrangements between Israel and Syria. However, the Syrians decided not to enable their officers to come to a meeting that was supposed to be held last month. And I said it was very unfortunate, not because the meeting was postponed. It will be held probably next month or so. But the problem was that until then we used to say, and we believe still so, that it's very hard to reach an agreement with the Syrians. But once you reach an agreement with the Syrians, they stick to the agreement and fulfill it to the letter. This time there was an agreement of this sequence of events, and the Syrians decided to back off. It introduced very negative feelings to this process of negotiations, because until then, and until then I'm referring also to the interim agreement that was negotiated by Kissinger in 1974, which is being kept until today. So it introduced some bad, negative vibes into the process. However, we believe that what we're going to see is a resumption of this track by shuttling of the secretary end of this month, and probably resuming of the talks both of the civil delegations and the military delegation next month. I can't be too optimistic on this track because there are certain time constraints which are well known in democratic countries, and they are called elections. No, I was not referring to Syria. But actually, our elections are going to be held in November 96, the same, actually almost at the same date that you will hold your elections. And we all know that as you approach election time, and with a process as complicated as we have, and I'm talking about the complexity of our system, because if it was not complex enough previous elections, we introduced some kind of innovative forms, because for the first time we are going to elect separately our prime minister and our parliament. Maybe similar to what you have here with president and the Congress. However, for us it will be the first time. We don't know exactly how it's going to work. And yet, not all the regulation, we have the legislation in place, but all the regulations of how exactly how will be the relationship between this new phenomena of that government that we are going to have and the Knesset and the parliament is going to work out. So if that was not complex enough before, we're going to see some more complexity in the next year, and running into primaries and then the separate elections. It would be impossible to conceive, and here, it's my personal opinion as a citizen, not as a diplomat, that if we do not have an agreement with the Syrians by very early next year, I cannot see it going through until after elections. Same applies to the situation here in the United States. I cannot see the government, and it depends on both arms of the government, both administration and Congress, which is needed, will have the time and energy to allocate to our remote region after the beginning of next year's primaries. So I don't see, if we will not have an agreement by the early next year, we will not have the agreement until at least a year. And in order to have an agreement early next year, we have to see a much more hastened and a quicker pace of negotiations resuming as of the end of this month. So it would be clear to all of us in a couple of weeks whether we are speeding up or actually just playing with time. Now, what is interesting to see in this peace process, and I was referring to the bilateral, and as you all know, the peace process consists of two tracks, not only of the bilateral negotiations between Israel and its neighbors, meaning Israel, Syria, Israel, Jordan, Israel, Palestinians, Israel, Lebanon, but also of a multilateral track. And the reason of that, and that was made very clear in the Madrid summit in October 91, fits exactly the topic of our talk today. Because if the bilateral track is aimed at putting an end to the past conflict between Israel and its neighbors, the multilateral track is aimed to lay an infrastructure for future cooperation. It is aimed to lay kind of a safety net to the peace process to create joint interest, mutual interest of the various parties in the region on which you could build the future relationship. Therefore, 5 working groups were developed. Each of them deals with a challenge, with a regional challenge that cannot be faced on a national level or in a national way. It has to be solved regionally. It has to be tackled regionally. Otherwise, you will not face it properly. The first one is Regional Economic Development Working Group, which led to regional projects, which led to the Casablanca Summit and now to the Amman Summit, which enabled us to build regional institutions that will be declared, actually officially inaugurated in this upcoming Amman Summit, such as a regional tourism board, a regional chamber of commerce, a Middle East development bank, or another regional financial institute. That's a debate between the Americans and the Europeans, exactly the type of institute. But at least a financial institute is going to be established. All those are aimed at bringing together the various countries in order to face regional projects. The other working group, the second one, is environment. You cannot deal with environmental problems on a national level. Environment doesn't know borders and boundaries. In order to solve questions of pollution, contamination, you need a regional approach. The best example was on the bilateral negotiation with Jordan. One of the topics of the agenda was flies. Seriously, flies. Those who make bzzz. In the southern part of the Dead Sea, there was in certain parts of the year an attack of flies from east to west and from west to east. They did not know the borders. They did not care about the minefields. They did not care about barbed wire. That was impossible to live in that part of the region. But we could spray our part. They could spray their part. They did not spray the same type of sprayer. And actually what you had, they were moving from one side to the other, north to south, and the problem was not solved. Only with this regional approach, they decided on the spray, the timing, and then it turned out it was not a question of spraying, but it was a question of the type of fertilizers that was used in the fields, which was so attractive to the flies. And those negotiations actually enabled to solve for the first time, or to face for the first time this problem. Or, if you want, the best example is the Dead Sea. The Red Sea. The Red Sea, which is really a pearl. Anyone who is interested in diving, in marine life, there's nothing to compare with the Red Sea anywhere in the world. The problem was that there's a port in Aqaba, that the ships were coming in, and somewhere on the way losing all kinds of oil spills and other things. There were, from our side of the border, unfortunately, the city of Eilat increased, and they did not know what to do with the overflow of sewage, and it went to the sea, and it became a disaster. And if that was not enough, the Egyptians were pouring their own garbage into the sea, and it became, from a pearl, it became, a garbage dump. It was only about 2 weeks ago that there was a regional, and that was discussed within the multilateral working group of environment. And there was a week of a joint effort orchestrated by an international organization called Eco something. And the whole week was dedicated to cleaning up the beaches and the water of the Red Sea. And the fact that it was done in coordination between Egypt, Israel, and Jordan, and able for the first time to clean the place. And there is coordination now about how to keep it in such a way, and again, for the benefit of those three countries. Because all efforts before that were national ones, and was actually to remove the garbage from here to there. The third working group is water. There is a shortage of water in the Middle East. There were so many theories and books were written about the next war in the Middle East, which will be the war over water resources. Now, frankly, any war over water resources will not solve the problem of shortage of water. Because no matter what you'll do, there is a shortage. So you can pull the blanket up or down, but there will always be a part that will not be covered. The only way to tackle the problem or to face this challenge is by increasing the water quantities of the region. Now, no country in the region can do it alone. But all of them together can do it. They can do it in 2 or 3 ways. One, by improving the utilization of the present reservoirs of water. The second one is by preserving and preventing the contamination of the reservoirs that exist. So meaning one is to, first of all, to stop leakages in the water systems. For example, in Amman, and we learned that through this working group, 40% of the water supplied to Amman is being lost due to unfit water system. At the same time, because of ill treatment of sewage, many of the reservoirs are being contaminated. So for the short time, that's what has to be done. For the longer time, we'll have to increase the amounts of water that we have. And this can do with, and there are many ideas that with a regional approach we can do it. Some of them, one of the ideas I remember that somebody put, which looked to me quite imaginative and unrealistic, but it works probably somewhere, is kind of huge balloons that are being carried by ships. And the idea was to fill those balloons in Turkey, to bring them to the region, and the region, I mean Israel, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. Those are the core countries, and of course the Palestinians who are in the middle. The other one is, of course, improving technology of desalination, and that's the key. It requires a lot of investment. But on a regional approach, with a regional effort, you can do it, because you improve the distribution of the water. Because, for example, if the major shortage is in Jordan, but in order to build this kind of a plant, it's much better to build it on a seashore because of cooling systems, and I'm not an expert, that's what I learned through the process of peace negotiations. But therefore, we could give water to the Jordanians from the Lake of Galilee, which is nearby to them. And they will participate in building a desalination plant on the coast, which supplies the western part, meaning Israel. So we could exchange water and to reduce the cost, the total cost. But if we are talking about a national approach, then the cost for water in Jordan will be 10 times more. There will be a shortage on the west and on the east. And everyone will try to solve it in a very narrow way, which will increase the cost and actually will prevent it from reaching a solution. The last two working groups are, of course, arms control and regional security. And I think the name explains exactly, you need an arms control regime, you need a security regime for the region in order to regulate the armament in the region and to enable future life. And of course, the refugees, which is a humanitarian problem which has to be solved. And actually it is on the agenda of the final status negotiation between us and the Palestinians. But again, you have refugees in Lebanon, you have refugees in Syria, there are the Jewish refugees in Israel. You have to come to some kind of a global or regional approach in order to solve this problem. Therefore, the region moves from, not only from confrontation to cooperation, but I think we are going also to a situation from, in a way, missed opportunities to seized opportunities. And we are seizing now every opportunity to develop better life to us in the region and to ensure the future of our children in the region that we are living. In order to progress that, or to promote that, the role of the United States is essential. And with all the credit we can take to ourselves, to our ingenuity, and the results of our moves, the role of the US is essential in order to reach agreements and to maintain them and implement them. This approach serves not only the interest of the region, but it serves also the interest of the US. It has been the interest of the US to achieve peace and tranquility for its own purposes, let alone ours. Whether it will be the flow of oil, preventing outbreak of regional and, in the old days, global confrontations. Therefore, it is a mutual interest, both, and therefore it was, and that's the reason it was always a bipartisan approach of all administrations. Look at the peace process where in the old days it was Reagan and Kissinger and Carter and the peace treaty with Egypt and Bush and Baker in order to reach the Madrid summit conference, and Clinton and Christopher to reach the present agreements. Without them, it wouldn't work. It's not accidental that those signing ceremonies take place in, on the lawns or on the East Room in the White House. It's because of the critical role that the U.S. Fulfills. And I think in order to serve the region, to serve the U.S. interest in the region, and to fulfill the leading role of the U.S. throughout the world, I think it is important that they will continue to participate in this effort, which will bring, as I said, a better future to all of us. Thank you very much.
The floor is now open for questions. Yes, sir.
Do you think that Arafat and the PLO can govern the Arabs?
The question is, do you believe that Arafat and the PLO can in fact govern the Arab world? Or I believe you imply coalesce the Arab world.
Well, I don't think that Arafat's supposed to govern the Arab world. I think that he's supposed to govern the Palestinians. Frankly, I believe that if you look at the Palestinian scene, I think he is the only leader that emerged there. He is the leader that led them through the years of terror, and he led them from terror into political dialogue. One thing, and I think I spent quite a lot of hours with Arafat, you learn that he is quite a shrewd politician. He knows what are his goals, and he wants to achieve them. And he learned throughout the years that he had to adapt his goals to reality. And the reality is much smaller or much more modest than his past dreams. If I look at the Palestinian scene, and the best way to judge it is by polls conducted by them, yes, he has a large majority. I wish that the polls will show that my government has such a majority that he has in his community. And his opponents, which the major opponent would be the Hamas, which is a fundamentalistic Islamic party, has a very small minority, consists of a very small minority, which moves between 13 to 23%. It depends in which area. Hebron, for example, which is a very religious city and very complicated situation within this present agreement that we've signed, has about 18%. So I think, yes, Arafat is the only leader that we can see on that scene, and therefore we negotiate with him. If we would have elected our opponents, then I'm sure we would have elected somebody else. Okay.
Two questions. What was the Cabinet's action today, and would you discuss Hebron?
Okay, let's differentiate between two things, and I think we have to put it in perspective. The agreement that was signed here last Thursday was approved by the Israeli cabinet on the day before coming here. And according to the Israeli law, agreements have to be approved or ratified by the cabinet and not by the parliament. Therefore, the agreement with the Palestinian was ratified by the cabinet, and it is a valid agreement, a valid international agreement.
The question is, are there specific plans among moderate states to combat terrorism?
Okay, let me start with your first comment. You're right, there are extremists on both sides of the island. You are perfectly right that there are. When I was referring to the coalition of the moderates against the extremists, I was referring to two types of coalitions. One is of the moderate governments who are cooperating in order to achieve peace, and the other one was the cooperation between moderate forces who are promoting peace against the extremist forces who are trying to derail it. And in this sense, I would include the Jewish extreme settlers as well as the Hamas movement and the Islamic movement. But when I was referring to terrorist movements who are endangering the stability of the region, I was referring to the fundamentalistic Islamic movement because they are the ones who have, I would say, with the support of Iran, the grand scheme of derailing the process, but that's only one of their goals. The other one is really to topple the moderate regimes, the Arab regimes in the region. And if you will look at the assassination attempt on President Mubarak, which has nothing to do with the peace process, it was because of his position and the awakening and the attempts of the Islamic, of the Muslim brothers in order to remove him. Same applies to what is going on in Jordan. And if you need a better example, look at Algiers. About the specifics, yes, there's a lot of attempts in that field. And when you can look at the cooperation between those governments, there's no doubt that I'm sure you don't have a doubt that tackling the fundamentalistic movement in the region is one of the items. And it's not only of the countries that I've mentioned, but you will look on the periphery of the region, whether it is cooperation between Turkey, Israel, Egypt, and other countries vis-a-vis extremists. And so with many of the countries involved directly in the peace process, as well as between Israeli security forces and Palestinian security forces cooperating in fighting terrorism within the territories. And the best example was the last closure on Gaza was done following, actually almost on the request, I would say. I wouldn't go as on the request, but following information given by the Palestinian security authorities to us about a terrorist activity that is about to be executed in Israel, and therefore the closure was put. So yes, there's quite a lot of it. Thank you very much.